divided and dysfunctional political party. So that doesn't change even if they change their leader. And secondly, if they are to impose a second unelected First Minister, the third First Minister in little over a year, then I don't think this is a plaything for the SNP. It's for the people of Scotland to decide.
A man with paranoid schizophrenia will be sentenced next month after killing an elderly man in a mobility scooter. Lee Byer, who's 45, pleaded guilty to the manslaughter of Thomas O'Halloran in Greenford in West London in August 2022. The US Secretary of State is hopeful Hamas will accept a truce in Gaza and hostage release deal. Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron has described it as a generous offer for a 40-day ceasefire. He's in Saudi Arabia speaking to other world leaders to calm regional tensions. Palestinian officials say 22 people have been killed in an overnight airstrike, including a 5-day-old baby, with the Israeli military saying they are checking. Lord Cameron says nothing will change until the captives are freed.
We're never going to solve this unless, as I said, you have the two things together. A state for the Palestinian people that gives them the dignity of statehood, but guarantees of Israeli security.
Rishi Sunak says he's not interested in a deal with Dublin on returning asylum seekers from Ireland. Westminster says it's not something the government would consider unless France took back people who crossed the Channel in small boats. LBC has been told some students are being blackmailed for all of their savings with a rise in so-called sextortion cases. Teachers have been told to warn pupils about the crime, which involves the sharing of explicit images. Sean Sutton is from the National Crime Agency. He says it's a huge concern.
We are seeing online some of these serious criminals sharing their techniques and essentially almost TikToking, this is how you do blackmail of people in developed countries with money, essentially. So we know that this is being shared in a systemized way, in a systemic way. And that's great, gaining traction, sadly. And people are seeing it as a way of essentially just making money.
And 1,500 jobs are at risk after grocery delivery firm Getir announced it will stop operating in the UK. The company says it will concentrate solely on its home market in Turkey. Once valued at £9.5 billion, it says it now only makes 7% of its revenue outside of the country. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 7 points at 81.47. The pound buys $1.25 and €1.17. LBC weather, a few showers for western areas tonight. These will be heavy on the southwest coast, drier and clearer further east, a low of 3. Cloudy skies tomorrow with showers continuing in the west, becoming sunnier in Northern Ireland later, dry with sunny spells and the odd shower further east, highs of 19 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 7 on LBC. Welcome to the show. It's Iain Dale here with you until 10. We're going to talk about transport, particularly the railways, over the next 45 minutes because we have the Shadow Transport Secretary, Louise Haigh, with us. Louise, welcome to the programme. Let's start off with the text, which I thought was quite amusing when I saw it a moment ago. Well played by Labour. Renationalising the railways is a policy the Tories won't nick. So you've achieved it first.
There we go. That's true. There is absolutely clear blue water in between us and the Tories on this. And, 4 years ago, well, actually even longer than that, when the 2018 timetabling disaster happened under Chris Grayling, he commissioned Keith Williams, the former CEO of BP and exec chairman of Royal Mail, to run an independent review of railways. And that led to the Shapps-Williams plan in 2020. So they conceded that reform was desperately needed on the railways that long ago, but they've completely failed to bring it forward. And we agree with some of their recommendations in that plan, including bringing track and train together, because the way the railways have been privatised and broken up over the last 30 years has meant they are incredibly confused and fragmented, and that various interests across the railway work against each other rather than together in the interest of the passenger. So we accept a lot of their recommendations, including the name of the new organisation, Great British Railways. I'm not, a totally egotistical politician. I'm not going to slap my own name on that. But we will go further and deliver full public ownership of the operations, which is obviously where the Tories have stopped. However, they have actually nationalised 4 of the biggest operators in the country in the last 10 years, which shows just how broken the current system is.
We'll get into the detail in a moment, but the idea of this 45 minutes, I'll talk to Louise for about 10 minutes and then over to your questions. So if you want to stack them up now, 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. You can ask about any aspect of transport. It's not just railways that she covers. And if there is a Labour government, she will be responsible for all transport policy. So feel free to ask about other aspects of it as well. In fact, let's start with a call because it's really what I was going to ask first anyway. Steph is in Peterborough. Hi, Steph.
Hi.
Hi,
Hello,
what would
Louise.
you like to ask?
Hi, Steph.
Hi, I'm going to ask Louise because a lot of people are confused. So can you please explain in layman's terms how they were going to put their trains into public ownership and the benefits? Because I do feel that some people don't quite understand the ins and outs of it all. I think there's a lot of people confused with nationalisation, and I'd like you to try to explain to everybody in terms where they understand.
Cool. So it's a really, really good question, and it is difficult because the railways are very, very complicated. It is a complex system. So the way that they've been privatised and broken up over the last 30 years has meant that you've got Network Rail, which is the publicly owned body that runs the tracks, the infrastructure, and they're responsible for all the upgrades and the maintenance. But you've also then got 14 different sections of the railway, or what were previously known as franchises, most of them run by private companies. And when we go to set the timetable, there's no one actually in charge and accountable for that timetable. Network Rail has to enter into very, very lengthy negotiations with the different operators, and it means we end up with a real patchwork result that isn't based on need or demand or the actual capacity of the network.
Surely it must be. I mean, it must partly be based on capacity, because otherwise they could be running trains that the railway couldn't cope with.
Well, that's exactly what happened in 2018. So they did negotiate a timetable that meant that they couldn't, the network couldn't cope, and then services had to be cut. Similarly, in other parts of the network, there is capacity that's not being used, that's not being properly delivered because the operators don't want to run there. So the fact that nobody is actually in control is a big part of the problem here, and that's why we want to set up a new body, Great British Railways, that will be in charge of the network as a whole, that will be able to set timetables, make sure capacity is maximised, and make sure that it delivers for the passenger. The problem at the moment is you've got all these private operators and Network Rail, which frankly is run, mostly in the interest of engineers and the infrastructure. They don't have passenger outcomes.
It is effectively nationalised, doesn't it, Network Rail?
It is, but it was born out of a culture, because it is only the infrastructure, it doesn't think about passenger outcomes. And that might sound really obvious to people listening, because they think, well, of course, when you talk about transport, you need to think about the people that are running it. But actually, too rarely in transport policy do we think about the people and what they need. And this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to reform our railways top to bottom so that they exclusively deliver for the passenger. So as part of that, we'll establish Great British Railways, we'll bring the remaining private operators into public ownership, so Great British Railways will be able to run and plan the network in a way that really delivers for passengers.
You could argue that privatisation in some ways has been very successful. If you look at passenger numbers, for example, up until before COVID, passenger numbers doubled. And I think that was partly because a lot more money was put into investing in rolling stock, and you're not planning to bring that back into public ownership. We might come on to that in a second. But it hasn't been a whole... I think it also depends on people's own experiences, doesn't it?
Yeah,
where
of course.
You might live in an area where there's a terrible service. I live in an area where there's actually a really good service, and I can't really... I mean, things go wrong, trains are late, but in any transport system there are going to be things that go wrong. But maybe we just judge it through our own experience.
I think that's right, and believe you me, I already get lots of people texting me all the time when their trains go wrong. But the system as a whole is not working for either passengers or the taxpayer. And it wasn't me who said that privatisation had never been accepted on British Railways because its failings had all been too obvious. It was Grant Shapps, who was then the Transport Secretary of State. And I think the way it was privatised has meant that there have been all these inefficiencies and wastefulness for the taxpayer. So I think what a lot of people don't understand is, despite it being privatised, we are still, the taxpayer, subsidising private operators to the tune of several £1 billion a year. And the taxpayer subsidises every single penny that is currently spent on the railways. So it's true to say that passenger numbers grew in the period of privatisation, but the economy also changed really significantly then. And there were independent reports that were verified by Network Rail that show that it's largely because the economy shifted to a service economy and people started changing the way that they travel. So I don't think that privatisation can really exclusively account for that.
But it did bring extra money in, didn't it? Because that was one of the main reasons. I mean, thinking back to 1992, when it all started, it was a bit the same with water, actually. But the main reason was that the public sector didn't have enough money to invest the money that was needed, particularly to renew the rolling stock and the tracks, similarly in the water industry. Now, that money did come in, certainly in the first few years. Whether it has in the last couple of decades, I'm not quite so sure.
Well, of course, the ownership of the tracks was a disaster, and that had to be very quickly brought back into public ownership. It was, privately owned rail track, and that was very, very unsafe. So we then took that back into public ownership, and we left the operations in private hands. And that has, as I've set out, become a very complex and fragmented system where they're all competing against each other. So, for example, when there are delays, instead of Network Rail working with the operators to work out how the delay happened and how we could fix it again in the future, instead they both employ armies of lawyers who have to work out who should pay for the mistake in the future and where the delay should lie. There's more than 300 people across the system whose only job it is to attribute blame for delay. All of that would be removed.
What a satisfying job that must be.
Yeah. Well, you could say I do it for a living as
well. Right, let's go to another caller, Mike in Oldham. Hello, Mike.
Hi, Ian. First time caller. Yeah, my question to Louise. Hello, Louise.
Hi, Mike. How are you?
The Labour government, will we commit to finishing HS2? It was overturned by the government, from Birmingham to Manchester.
Well, HS2 was originally designed, actually went all the way up to Leeds as well, and I'm a Sheffield MP, and the plans that were going to serve Sheffield were some of the first to be cut back in 2020. Look, we can't take HS2 back off the shelf again and commit to funding it now. The costs were massively overblown and mismanaged under successive Conservative governments, and they've really, really undermined confidence both in HS2 and in the wider railways, really. And I speak to investors and business people all the time who say they look at Britain now and their confidence has really been shot. That's why we didn't just want to leap in and say, well, we'll do this project, we'll do that project. We wanted to re-inject some confidence back into the country's ability to build infrastructure. So I asked Jürgen Mayer, who's the former CEO of Siemens, to set up an expert-led review into how we deliver infrastructure in this country and to help us develop the plans. So I can't commit here and now exactly what those plans will look like, but what I want to reassure listeners is that we are working with experts and with mayors and with local leaders to try and develop a credible plan that we can then actually deliver, because the way that the government and previous Tory governments have handled this is to make promises, overblown promises that they can't keep. That then really undermines confidence and it massively drives prices up.
So this article in the Telegraph on the 21st of March is wrong, is it, where it says that you've privately indicated that you have plans to resurrect part of the northern leg of HS2, the bit Birmingham to Crewe?
As you'll see, it's completely unsourced. It's completely untrue, and that journalist came to my office and was told it was untrue as well.
Before we wrote the article? Mm-hmm. Oh dear.
Yes.
Well, okay, well, you've clarified that one. Look, we're getting lots and lots of texts. Keep your calls coming as well. 0345 6060 973. We have Louise Haigh, the Shadow Transport Secretary, with us for the next half an hour. It's 7:15 on LBC.
This is LBC.
Hello. I'm currently out of office. An article I read recently said we're more relaxed and more productive after a good break. So I've gone to Barbados for a month for science. Yours, Toby.
Take your holiday as seriously as British Airways Holidays take your holiday. Atoll protected.
When it comes to maximising your savings, timing is everything. And now is the perfect time to take advantage of your full allowance with a new Cuffling Innovative Finance ISA. You could earn up to 10.25% tax-free interest gross per annum over a 1-year term. It's fee-free with loan secured against property. Visit cufflink.com, Kuflink. Your capital is at risk. Tax rules apply to IF ISAs and may be subject to change. Cufflink is authorised and regulated by the FCA.
Hey, Harry.
Hello, mate.
Got a nap lined up for today.
Listen, pal, I may not look like the young stallion I once was, but I'm still fit as a fiddle, I'll have you know.
No, Harry, that's not what I meant.
I'm not even that old. I do boxercise 3 times a week, and my trainer says...
No, I meant the horses. Your nap, your Napoleon, your best bet.
Oh, well, you should have said that. My best bet will be to head over to Bet Victor and check out the latest offers they have on the horses.
Listen to Harry and make your best bet on the racing at Bet Victor. 18 plus, begambleaware.org.
Life's all about experiences. And with thousands of business class flights available in the British Airways Original Sale, now's your chance to relax before takeoff in one of our lounges. Savour the finest locally sourced British dishes while you fly. Or sip on award-winning English sparkling wine. Book your British Airways business class flights at ba.com/sale. Sale ends 14th of May. Limited availability. Conditions apply.
Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
17 minutes past 7 on LBC. Louise Haigh, the Shadow Transport Secretary, is with us taking your calls. You can watch us if you'd like to on Global Player as well. Just before we come to Ben in Nottingham, though, this isn't a real full-blooded renationalisation, isn't it? It's a sort of half renationalisation. The rail unions would like you to go a lot further. Why haven't you decided to take it back, lock, stock and barrel, and recreate British Rail?
Well, I think there'd be quite a lot of consternation amongst some, particularly some slightly older listeners, if we said we were going to recreate British Rail in its entirety. Look, of course, there are some that want us to go further than we have done, but this is a very sensible and pragmatic way to improve the railways. We've said we will take the private operators back into public ownership as their contracts expire. All of them come up to at least their core term expiry date within the first term of a Labour government. That means all of the operations can be in public ownership by the end of the first term. And by doing it in this way, it means we won't have to pay any compensation in taxpayers' money because the government gives those contracts to operators. We won't have to compensate shareholders or anything like that. You talked about the investment in rolling stock earlier, and that happens because it is set up through these companies called Roscoes that keep it off balance sheet and allow private money to be brought in to invest in the trains. Is that the real reason that you haven't gone for the Roscoes? Because Rachel Reeves wouldn't allow it because it would have to appear in the Treasury numbers. Well, it would be a significant investment. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And the choice then is: do we want to spend public money on trains or investing in the NHS and in schools? And those are very difficult choices at the moment. But if it doesn't mean more money for the railways, if it doesn't mean reduced fares, what's the point of it? It's just shifting things around, isn't it? So it will mean better performance of services. We absolutely believe that this reformed system will lead to fewer delays and better performance. It will be more accountable, so we can hold Great British Railways far more accountable on the quality of their service and their performance. At the moment, it's really difficult to hold operators or even Network Rail particularly to account. And we absolutely do want to make fares more affordable, but it wouldn't be very credible for me to sit here today and say, the Manchester to Alfreton is going to cost £3 less than it is now. The fares system is incredibly complex and it relies on regulation that needs reform. And until I get in and open the books and look at how we can do that, I'm not going to sit and make commitments. Will you guarantee that there will be democratic accountability in Great British Railways? Because the problem that there is with several of the agencies that were, they're not private agencies, like National Highways, for example.
as Secretary of State, you have really very little influence over national highways. And I'm thinking, well, what's the point of being Secretary of State if you can't tell them what to do? Is this going to be the same with Great British Railways?
So the way that we've set it up, because we're very conscious of that as well, it does need to be properly accountable, is to say the Secretary of State will set a strategy, a long-term strategy updated every 5 years with clear objectives by which they will be held to account. They will be required to come and report to Parliament against those objectives. And we're also setting up a new watchdog, the Passenger Standards Authority, that will hold them rigorously to account on behalf of passengers. And that's really the important point here, is we want to change the whole culture of the way that the railways are run. As I said earlier, at the moment they're kind of dominated by engineers, and in the interests of shareholders, we want passengers to be at the heart of the railways. And so the way that this is set up is really important. And I've said, I won't be involved in the day-to-day running of the railways, as the current Secretary of State sometimes is. I will be the passenger-in-chief holding the railways to account on behalf of passengers everywhere. And I get the railways at least a couple of times a week. So I'm well qualified to be passenger-in-chief already.
Right, let's go to Charlie in Cannock. Charlie, you have a question on something other than railways.
Yeah, buses it's on. I'm in Staffordshire at the moment. So I got a bus. Me and my friend, we went up to Stafford from Cannock, which is like the next town over. On the bus, we went to see a film at the cinema, and then we came out and we went to the pub. And he was just about to look at the menu. I said, I don't know if we'll have time for that. We got about 10 minutes to get on our bus, because the last bus out back to Cannock was at something like 8:10. And it was one of those times where I wasn't livid about it or anything, but I was disappointed because it felt like the evening was just getting started and we had to call it to a close,
Yeah, absolutely. And it happens all the time, doesn't it? With people not able to get back from the gig, or having been, stayed in for last orders, or get to work on time because the first bus doesn't start till after 9 o'clock. So we actually launched our bus plan for England, because buses are obviously devolved. So we've just focused on England 2.5 weeks ago. And they basically include extending the power that London and Greater Manchester currently enjoys to every area of England. So for the last 40 years, London has had the power to franchise its buses and to set the routes, services and fares, and then operators come in and bid for whether they would run those services or not. And over the last 6 years, Andy Burnham has managed to move there in Greater Manchester as well. But in the rest of the country, in places like Stafford and Cannock, private operators have complete power to pick and choose whichever routes and services they want to run, and therefore stop at 8:10 in the evening.
But presumably they stop at 8:10 because they would say there's not enough demand to run one at 10:10.
So yeah, but it's also an incredibly inefficient way to run it. So they will stop at 8:10 because it stops being commercially viable. But then the local authority has to pick up those ones that aren't commercially viable. So they're using council taxpayers' money to fill in the gaps, and the private operators are creaming off all the profit for the commercially viable ones. So by planning a network properly and cross-subsidising from those commercially viable routes to less so, then you're able to spread taxpayers' money far more efficiently and run a network that works better.
Well, why don't you bring buses back into public ownership?
So we have also said that we will reverse. There is currently an ideological ban on municipal bus ownership. We've said we'll reverse that, so that if local transport authorities want to do that, then they can establish a challenger service. And we know this works from evidence. So in Greater Manchester, Andy has brought the buses back into public control. Passenger numbers and revenue is already higher than projected. And in those areas that resisted the privatisation of the 1980s, in Reading and Nottingham, they have bus services that routinely compete for the best bus services in the country, and far higher passenger numbers per head than the rest of England outside London. So we know where they are run for the public, by the public service, they are competing and they are delivering a better service.
Now, since you mentioned his name, I'm not going to mention it again. We're in an election period, so we have to point people to lbc.co.uk/candidates, because other candidates, believe it or not, are available. Charlie, thank you very much for that. Well, that would be a turnout, wouldn't it? Let's go to Scott in Norwich. Hello, Scott.
Good evening, Ian. Good evening, Louise.
Hi.
My question is, should there be strikes on transport in the future, will you, as Transport Minister and the Labour government, commit to immediately getting round the table with unions and negotiating fair pay and fair conditions?
A very, very good question, and one that I repeatedly ask, the opposite of Mark Harper, because he unbelievably has not met with the trade unions in over 18 months.
But he's not the employer, is he?
Well, the Department of Transport sets the mandate for the train operating companies, and he sets the mandate by which they can, the framework with which they can negotiate within, and also the budget by which they have available. So he completely has the operators' hands tied, and frankly, unless he's at the negotiating table, they aren't able to find a solution. And I think, he has sort of sat back and allowed these strikes to continue, and I don't want to sound like I'm obsessed with him, but his predecessor, Grant Shapps, deliberately provoked these strikes. And it's not just me or the unions saying that, but rail employers say that as well. The operators have said that he deliberately poisoned the well because he thought it was a clever political ruse to embarrass the Labour Party. And here we are, almost 2 years on into the first national strike in a generation. It's costing the taxpayer £25 million a day, and it's causing havoc for passengers. So I think, we've had successive Tory transport secretaries that have either willfully willed these strikes on or aren't particularly interested in resolving them.
Okay, so on day one, you invite the rail unions in for beer and sandwiches.
I don't know about beer on day one.
All right, champagne. What do you say to that? What's your first gambit? Because there'll be a lot of people listening to this programme and think, it'll be Labour sitting down with the unions, they'll just give in to all their demands, and it'll be just like the 1970s, and there'll be more strikes than there have been, etc., etc. Now, you've got to prove that you're not going to be an easy negotiator. Would you literally go in there, throw your papers on the table and say, look, lads, it's not going to be like you think it is?
Well, look, we, in Labour-run Wales, they avoided a strike at all on their rail operations. They still had a national one because of Network Rail, but on the railway operations that the Labour government there control, they avoided one because they sat down and they found a solution. That doesn't mean they gave in to everything. They found a sensible pay agreement that didn't break the bank, and they found some compromise on workplace reforms as well. I think, there is always a way through, as has been repeatedly shown by leaders that are prepared to sit down and work in partnership.
There have been agreements in England between the rail companies and the unions. I think the RMT have come to agreements, as the TSSA have come to agreements. So, but ASLEF seems to be the one that stands out. What would you do to solve the ASLEF dispute?
Well, part of our reforms are that we would work together to develop a long-term workforce strategy and start to head off some of these issues at the pass rather than allowing them to be poisoned so close to potential disputes. But I do think, there are particular management issues in certain of the train operating companies. You saw that happen when TransPennine Express was brought back into public ownership, and the rest day working agreement that had been holding up a compromise with ASLEF was solved almost immediately. I do think there are particular issues in particular train operators at the moment that could be resolved with different leadership, and there is certainly different political leadership that could be offered. I know it's frustrating because I'm not able to say, look, I would offer this pay rise or I would offer this compromise because I'm not currently at the negotiating table, but being at the negotiating table full stop would help move things forward. Of that I am absolutely certain.
Right, lots more to talk to Louise about. If you'd like to give her a call, it's 0345 6060 973. It's 7:30 on LBC. Let's get the news headlines with Amelia Cox.
The SNP is beginning its search for a new leader after Humza Yousaf announced his resignation as Scotland's First Minister. He'll stay in the role until his replacement is appointed. The National Crime Agency says the number of teenagers reporting being blackmailed over intimate photos has doubled in a year. The organisation has sent out an alert to teachers to warn their pupils over what they're sharing. And the US and the UK are urging Hamas to accept what has been described as a generous ceasefire deal from Israel. A delegation from the group are in Cairo for talks over the new proposal. LBC weather, a few showers for western areas tonight. These will be heavy on the southwest coast, drier and clearer further east, a low of 3 degrees.
This is LBC.
This is what award-winning customer service sounds like from real Octopus Energy calls.
Yeah, you know where I am if you need anything in the future.
You've been brilliant. You've all been brilliant.
You know, it's what electricity companies should be. There's no one in the world I would change my supplier.
You've been brilliant, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you for talking to me. It's been very good with it, thank you so much to you and Octopus.
Octopus Energy. Outstanding service at fair prices.
There it is, sat round doing nothing. That old lump sum. But what if you could get it moving with a Shawbrook savings account? Suddenly, it's looking healthier. It finally got off its AER. So stand up and take notice of our notice accounts. Bond with our fixed-rate bonds, or take it easy with easy access. Save smarter, not harder, with Shawbrook. Spark your interest today at shawbrook.co.uk. Shawbrook Bank is authorised by the Prudential Regulation Authority and regulated by the FCA and PRA.
Ugh, I never liked her anyway.
He's clearly a narcissist.
Well, she stopped. She's seeing the kids.
He negotiates for a living. Lawyer up and protect yourself.
We get it. You mean well. But when someone you love gets divorced, saying these things does more harm than good. That's where we come in. Amicable is a legal service that makes divorce kinder and simpler. No demonising, no aggression, just better outcomes for everyone. Amicable.co.uk. Divorce made kinder.
Flying from Luton Airport? The Luton Airport Express takes you from London St Pancras to the terminal in as little as 32 minutes, from just £10. So let's go. Let's go for adventures with friends, sun and sea with the family, or a city escape somewhere romantic. There's no traffic and no stress. So pack your bags and let's go on the Luton Airport Express. Buy your tickets now at lutonairportexpress.co.uk.
Did you know at TK Maxx, you can find big brands up to 60% less than the RRP? I got this quilted leather handbag, must-have moisturiser, and 3 pairs of branded jeans. Skinny, boyfriend, flared. All incredible savings. I'm basically a denim connoisseur. There's no deal like a TK Maxx deal. Big brands, small prices. In-store and online.
Customer service matters. Octopus Energy. Recommended by Which? 7 years running. Octopus Energy. Outstanding customer service at fair prices.
Leading Britain's conversation. Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
7:33 on LBC. Louise Haigh, the Shadow Transport Secretary, is here taking your calls. 0345 6060 973. Let's talk to Glenda in Medway. Hello, Glenda.
Hello there. Good evening, Louise.
Hi, Glenda. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. My question to you, Louise, is what are you going to do about the dire situation of the potholes in the country, and especially Medway, where we live?
It's a really, really big question, and it's one of the biggest things that comes up on the doorways. I was in.
But you've looked into it.
Yeah. I've got every answer. Look, it is a massive. It's a massive issue. It's facing everyone in the country, and the backlog, because the roads haven't been invested in for the last 14 years. The backlog now stands at £16 billion on local roads, if you could believe it. So there's a huge hill to climb. But we have said, and I'm afraid I don't have any money to announce today, but it is an area that we are looking at as a priority. But what we want to do is reform planning so that we can improve and speed up the investment in roads infrastructure that really slows down upgrades and speed up traffic works as well and road works. So whilst I'm not able to say right now that there is money that we can invest, there are other things that we can do around planning.
The government have put an extra £2.5 billion, haven't they, into potholes? And I've seen that the road outside my house had really some serious ones, and we reported it, and within 3 days they were all done.
Yeah,
so,
having cut, as I say, 16 billion over the last 14 years, or left a £16 billion backlog, they are now investing a bit ahead of election time. But there is evidence. There was evidence recently published that shows that Labour councils invest more in pothole and road maintenance than Conservative ones. But it is a huge issue. I know lots of councils are investing in technology now in order to spot and monitor the potholes a lot quicker. But they have been. Our roads have been massively underinvested in, and I know it's causing a huge issue for MOTs and for damage to cars. It's also one of the big factors behind why car insurance has rocketed so much in the last few years as well, because more cars are having more dings and dents and having to and struggling to get through their MOTs. So that's something else we're looking at.
Do you drive?
I do, yes.
Because people then say, well, look at what Labour have done in Wales. They're in government in Wales. They've banned any new road building at all. They've introduced 20-mile-an-hour limits, which admittedly are now being reversed. But it doesn't actually instill a lot of confidence, I think, certainly in road users.
Well, I drive a lot. I drive a Nissan Juke, if it's of interest to your listeners. Wales have revisited the 20-mile-per-hour policy, as you say, because I think it was never intended as a blanket ban. Lots of people want 20-mile-per-hour roads around their schools and in built-up residential areas, and I think that's right. And I think it's right for local areas to decide on where those 20-mile-per-hour areas should be. But we're absolutely not into policies that limit driving at all. What we want to do is make sure there are lots of options for people, because at the moment our public transport system is broken in a way that means it's often not an option for people to use the bus or use the train rather than use their car. There used to be a direct link between Sheffield and Manchester Airport, so that I used to, if I flew from Manchester Airport, I'd jump on the train. It doesn't exist anymore, so more often than not, I have to drive, and that's ridiculous.
But you say Labour's the friend of the car owner, well, not according to the Sun newspaper.
Oh gosh,
I've been doing the research, Louise. Because they've said today, Labour has announced it will set anti-car targets in a bid to slash the carbon footprint. Shadow Transport Secretary Louise Haigh today outlined plans for renationalising rail services within 5 years if Labour wins the next election. And it then goes on, I'm trying to find the relevant bit here, but a detailed policy document also revealed how the party wants to dramatically shift Brits' travel habits away from cars towards greener options like trains. Well, so far, so good.
Yeah.
But, I mean, how are you going
End of article, doesn't it?
Well, no, it does go on a bit. And I think they point to, like, page 16 of your document or something.
That's fine. It wasn't a secret document. It was very publicly announced on Thursday.
But I think the point is, if you're going to get people out of their cars, how are you going to do it? Are there going to be punitive measures effectively to force them out of their cars?
No, so what this Sun article is talking about is that we've said we will give Great British Railways modal shift targets. So they will be required to make train the positive choice. They won't have punitive powers over car drivers. They will be required to make sure that it is a positive option, not just for drivers, by the way, but at the moment, quite often it's cheaper to get the plane internally within this country than the train. And I think most people would agree that's crazy. Most people would rather get on the train if it was affordable to do so. And it's those kind of incentives that we want to give people. In fact, it is the Conservatives who have driven a lot of the low traffic neighbourhoods and some of the active travel stuff that we've seen that now Mark Harper is jumping up and down about and delivering this huge backlash against. We want to give local people choice, and we want to make sure that the public transport options are genuinely there if people want to use them.
Right, let's do some quick text questions. This is from Peter, who says, will the Labour Party bring back hard shoulders? I.e., basically, what's your policy on smart motorways?
Yeah, so I'm really worried about smart motorways, and there's increasing evidence all the time that the technology just simply isn't working. So yes, in quick answer to your text message, yes, we would reinstate the hard shoulder.
Alex in Epping has emailed, the UK airline industry is worth £24 billion to the UK economy and supports over 1 million jobs. What is Labour's position on Heathrow expansion?
So, post-COVID, Heathrow has given indications that they're not now looking at a third runway, as was traditionally being debated, but are looking at expansion without that third runway. And look, as long as expansion can be within our legally binding climate change targets, we're all for it. As has been said, it's a huge contributor to our economy. It supports millions of jobs across the country. And we have these legally binding climate change targets. There's also strict controls on noise and air pollution around airports. As long as airports can demonstrate that they can expand within that, then we've got absolutely no objection.
WhatsApp question from Marcus, who says, Conservatives are cutting all of the electric vehicle incentives. What will Labour do to help people make the switch? Brackets, cutting VAT, question mark.
So we've got no plans to cut VAT at the moment, but what we have said is that we will set targets on regional authorities across the country to deliver those public charging points, because that is one of the biggest. They've not set regionally binding targets on...
well, they have set targets.
They're not binding.
Okay.
And I don't think they have set targets, not regional targets to cover public charge points, because it is massively regionally imbalanced at the moment. There's more public charging points in the borough of Westminster than there are across the 12 largest northern towns and cities combined, and that's a massive inhibitor to people making the switch to EVs. I know you've spoken about that before, Ian.
I have. You haven't made the switch yourself?
No, I haven't.
Why?
No. Well, partly because there aren't enough public charging points. Well, yeah, I read your column and I thought, no, that doesn't sound much good.
Didn't realise I had so much influence. Right, let's move on to Patrick in Stowmarket. Patrick, very good evening to you. What would you like to ask?
Hi, Ian. Hi, Louise.
Hi.
Yeah, first of all, I should probably start off by saying I'm fully behind the principle of nationalising the railways. But the concern I have is, how is that going to impact already extortionate ticket prices? To give you a bit of personal background, I live in East Anglia. I work in London. It's about an hour and 20-minute direct line into Liverpool Street for me. And a monthly season ticket is £814. And that doesn't include the tube. A flexi ticket is £650 for 8 journeys in a month. You know, that's higher than my mortgage currently until my 5-year fix ends in a couple of years. How do you envisage that impacting ticket prices?
Yeah, Patrick, I think you live on possibly the most expensive stretch of railway in the country. I think it is the highest season ticket price between East Anglia and London. Look, as I said earlier, I'm not going to sit here today and say we're going to make this fare cheaper and that fare cheaper, because I don't. The honest answer is I don't know. But the absolute objective of these reforms are to make tickets more accessible and the railways more affordable for people. We've set out that this reform could save the taxpayer and therefore the railways as much as £2.2 billion a year by the end of 5 years. We would absolutely want to use that money to make fares cheaper. We've also said that we would deliver what's known as a best fare guarantee. So at the moment, when you tap in and tap out of the London Underground or Overground, anywhere on the Transport for London network, you know that you are paying the lowest fare for that journey. When you travel on the National Rail network, quite often you feel like you're being secretly fleeced in some way or another, because the tickets are so complicated and deliberately it feels set up in a way designed to maximise their revenue. But the other way that I would say is, at the moment, all of the operators are under very strict conditions about what fares they can set, and they are set very rigidly from the centre. What these reforms will do is encourage decisions as close to the ground as possible to incentivise people on the railways and give Great British Railways the freedom to set fares at a level that will attract people on. At the moment, they are set very rigidly from the centre, and it means there's no carrot to encourage people onto the railways. So we would want to make sure that flexibility was done, just as the same way in airlines, for example, so that they fill up those seats and they're done at a lower price to maximise revenue and maximise numbers of people on the railways.
Right, let's go to Anthony in Bourne in Lincolnshire. Hi, Anthony.
Hello, good evening, Ian and Louise. My question to you is, I'm an independent bus operator in South Lincolnshire. I've been a family business for over a century, serving our community. Your plans to expand the franchising process to all local authorities is great a cause for concern for small independents like ourselves who are not portable, and we're concerned that the big companies will use that as a thing that they can use predatory pricing on us, and it will have a massive impact on small businesses like ourselves, who also provide a lot of home-to-school transport, which the PLCs and the big groups don't currently do. So how is this going to benefit communities and the taxpayer, who will be, footing the bill if we are taken out of the marketplace?
Thanks, Anthony. It's a really important question, and I'm glad you've asked it, because I oversimplified my answer earlier and just talked about franchising, when I think I probably know which operator you are in Lincolnshire, and your community speak very highly of you. So in certain areas of the country, franchising won't be the right model. But what our reforms want to do is set out maximum flexibility for areas so that they can develop the right system for that area. So to have whether it be a minimum local standard for operators, franchising or franchising plus models, so that operators like you can take a minimum contract with the authority and then add on with a cost plus model. So we want to make sure that areas have the possibility if they want to bring in franchising, but where there are excellent independent operators that frankly know best how to deliver for their local communities, especially in really challenging areas like rural Lincolnshire, then the Transport Authority will have that option as well. So we really want to make sure that it's just areas have as much option as possible to deliver the best for local taxpayers and for passengers and for the communities.
And just going back to railways, will you commit to not interfering with the operations of Trainline?
Oh,
because
yeah,
it seems to me that they provide a service which the rail companies ought to be providing.
Oh, definitely. That was why I made my announcement at Trainline on Thursday. And the reason why I did that was because I do think they are an excellent example of good customer service. And I wanted to give a very strong signal that this was the best practice in the market that we wanted to take from.
And they do give you all of the different options. I mean, I've got a text here from Alistair who says, I've just booked a ticket on Thursday from Wigan to Largs, return for £33. I mean, that's not bad, is
Where's
it?
Largs?
Scotland.
Oh, is it? Right. Okay,
You've just offended the whole... You were doing so well up until that point.
Oh, no.
In fact, so well that Mark in Suffolk says, wow, who is this politician on the show? Confident, knowledgeable and not at all evasive when asked questions. More of this, please.
Right.
And a final text question from Jamie in York, who says, Louise is a great speaker. Could we have her as Labour leader, please?
Right, OK. That's my life savings wiped out now. I've paid so many people to ask questions this evening.
No, the correct answer to that is there isn't a vacancy.
There isn't a... You're absolutely right, Ian. Gosh, sorry.
Well, we'll have you back before the election because I think transport ought to be one of the key policy areas of the election.
Absolutely.
And love to get you in with Mark Harper, actually. Do a head-to-head debate.
I'd love that as well.
Well, let's see if we can organise that. Louise Haigh, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, don't forget, Cross Question is coming up at 8, and we would love to have your questions. The lines are already open, 0345 6060 973. We have Paul Scully, the Conservative MP for Sutton and Cheam, former government minister. Reen Ap Urath, and I know I've got that wrong, but I will get lessons in the news as to how to pronounce it properly. A leader of Plaid Cymru and a member of the Senedd for Ynys Môn. I mean, that is just the most nightmare description that a radio presenter can have to read out. Joanne Nadler is going to be with us, political commentator, and Matthew Todd, the author, playwright and stand-up comedian. I didn't know he did stand-up, and he tweets a lot on climate change issues. So they're going to be with me after 8 o'clock. Looking forward to your questions, 0345 6060 973. It's 7:49.
LBC This Morning on Nick Ferrari at Breakfast.
There seems to be this continued crackdown on various benefit issues and the suggestion that disabled people could lose monthly payments and be given vouchers instead. Work and Pension Secretary and Conservative MP Mel Stride.
Is it right to be giving cash transfer payments, or is it better in at least to be giving better support and better treatment? So I want to come up with a benefit system here that is certainly sustainable financially, but equally I wanted to do the maximum for improving people's outcomes in life.
In Maidstone.
Handing the decisions about people's health across to job coaches, and that's quite frightening.
Nick Ferrari at Breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. LBC.
Oh, must be the new parent posse chat. We're not even new. Our kids are 8. Or, as Eddie says, 96 months. He moved off grid. Can confirm he's still on grid. And he's got another one on the way. He won't have the coverage to live stream the birth, will he?
Well, here at Tesco Mobile, we've made sure he has 99% network coverage. So he could if he wanted to.
Oh, sign me up.
It pays to be connected. Tesco Mobile. Every little helps. Over 99% UK population coverage on 4G.
Flying from Luton Airport. The Luton Airport Express takes you from London St Pancras to the terminal in as little as 32 minutes. From just £10. So let's go. Let's go for adventures with friends, sun and sea with the family, or a city escape somewhere romantic. There's no traffic and no stress. So pack your bags and let's go on the Luton Airport Express. Buy your tickets now at lutonairportexpress.co.uk.
Time for a garden spring clean. Blast away winter grime with a Karcher pressure washer and start looking forward to those longer days spent in your garden. Barbecues, alfresco dining and outdoor movie nights await. Ah, bliss. This is what Karcher Clean feels like. Bring back the wow.
Ladies and gentlemen, Bob Marley.
From Paramount Pictures.
I want to make music that changed the world.
What do you have in mind? Something big.
Give me a one drop, man.
Bob Marley, One Love.
Sometimes the messenger has to become the message.
Experience the untold story at home.
You like that one?
Bob Marley, One Love. Own it now.
Really? Come on, let's go.
Hear that? That's the sound of my customers leaving.
When your broadband doesn't work, neither does your business.
Will Sky Business keep me up and running, no matter what?
With 4G backup and our Stay Connected guarantee, better believe it. Let our dedicated Sky Business team handle your switch today.
That's more like it.
Subject to availability. For T's and C's, visit skybusiness.com.
Iain Dale. Text 84850. This is LBC.
7:52. Judging by the comments coming in on texts and WhatsApp messages, a lot of you were rather impressed by Louise Haigh. Jan in Birmingham says, I'm not a Labour voter normally, but what an excellent shadow minister you've just had on. Articulate, bright and full of ideas. Would love to see her in charge of transport. I feel like it would finally be in a sensible pair of hands. This is from Lou, who's not that one, who says, if the operators are taken into public ownership without compensation to shareholders, is that likely to cause shareholders a loss? If so, what impact will that have on pension funds, often major shareholders of such companies? And if so, isn't that just causing a cost elsewhere to find from the public purse? And Jay says, what an impressive guest talking about Labour's position on transport. Listens to the questions and answers not from a head office crib sheet. Louise is very impressive. I mean, I always think that's a really good thing when people react in that way. It doesn't really matter what politics the politician has. You want people who can connect with the public, and I think Louise is one of those. Darren Jones, who was on Cross Question last week, he did exactly the same thing because he was honest enough to admit that he didn't know an answer to a question, and that was very humorous when he did get the answer from Labour HQ, and I think a lot of people appreciated that. Now, before we come to tonight's Cross Question, let's hear a little of the latest episode of the For the Many podcast. In this part of the main podcast, recorded on Friday, Jackie Smith and I discuss the drama unfolding in Holyrood, and we explain why Humza Yousaf's issues were completely unexpected. No one was predicting that he would end the coalition agreement. If it was going to end, it was assumed the Greens would end it, but he got in first, which I thought at the time was a bit of a political masterstroke, but actually it's proved the reverse, hasn't it?
Because the Greens had decided, hadn't they, that they were going to have, in a sort of green way, they were going to ask their members if they wanted to continue in this coalition that they have with the SNP up in Scotland, which gives them a majority, and it also gives the Greens 2 seats in government. I hadn't realised that although it's only a confidence and supply, they also get ministerial roles. But when obviously Humza Yousaf has come under pressure from people within his own party, given that they are languishing slightly in the polls and now are behind Labour for the first time in a long time, that they need to, I think the feeling in parts of the SNP is they needed to dump the green stuff and dump what they would consider to be the woke stuff. And he had essentially gone back on the climate change target that had been set. I forget the complete details of it, but I think it had to do with decarbonising power, if I remember rightly, or cars, one or the other. Anyway, I was pretty surprised when I saw that the Greens had actually accepted the losing of that target, because you sort of think, what's the point of Greens being in government if it isn't to ensure strong targets like that? And I suspect Humza probably rightly thought, I said that.
No, you didn't. You said Humza.
I said Humza.
No, you didn't.
You told me to say it this morning, and I've been saying it.
No, you didn't just then.
That's completely unintentional then, because I